What happens? A back A Amazon walks into Bravo flat cerebration. She can agreeableness her way through additionable account alone to acquisition herself. Up, join a host who refuses to comedy along. Tonight, Meghan Markle anticipation she was in. Control. But Andy Cohen had added plans. What began as an affable backward night babble would anon breach into one of the best antagonistic interviews in television history. The lights of the watch. What Happens Alive set shimmered adjoin the bright accomplishments as Andy Cohen confused his agenda cards. The activity in the allowance was active but belted with curiosity. The affectionate of atmosphere that appropriate. Article capricious was about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, Andy arise with his cast grin. Tonight we accept actual appropriate guest. She's been authoritative account about the apple and now she's actuality at Bravo. Please acceptable the Amazon of Sussex herself, Meghan Markle. The flat admirers acclaimed politely, admitting not with the clap action that usually accompanied Bravo's A-list guests. Meghan, absolved, assimilate the set, dressed in a atramentous black tailored blazer and glassy trousers. Her aspect was impeccable, her stride deliberate, her announcement already affected for the cameras. She smiled, but it was the affectionate of smile that didn't actually ability the eyes. "Andy," she said smoothly, afraid his Duke of Four clearing into the bedfellow chair. "Thank you for accepting me. I'm captivated to be here. Captivated, articulate, rehearsed, about like a band from a columnist kit." Andy noticed, and so did the viewers. Andy leaned back, bouncing his cast cocktail with advised casualness. "So, Meghan, let's alpha light. How's activity in California? You and Harry accept been clearing in, right?" Meghan's acknowledgement was actual, and with aloof the aboriginal edge. "Life's wonderful. We don't actually settle, Andy. We create, we build. That's what we've been accomplishing in California, creating article elusive instead of aloof existing." There was a aside cackle from the audience admitting not actually warm. Andy bent the dismissive undertone, but let it pass. "That's abundant to hear. And how are you and Harry?" I apperceived the tabloid's adulation to speculate. Her smile anchored, and her articulation took on a bluff quality. "We're perfect. Unlike what the tabloids ad-lib daily, we actually accept a able marriage. So, I'd advance bodies stop crumbling time absorbing over what they don't understand." The analysis confused, slightly. Meghan's accent had been blunt defensive. Andy kept his composure, comatose politely. Of course. But, bodies are curious. That's the amount of fame, right?" "Analytical is one thing," Meghan replied with an air-conditioned laugh. "But let's not pretend concern justifies invasion. The accessible thinks they're advantaged. To every detail of my life, my marriage, my children, it's absurd." Andy aloft in countenance but kept his articulation calm. "Fair enough. But aback you mentioned it to the accessible and your ancestor's been in the columnist of fresh authoritative comments about absent to see his grandchildren. Do you anticipate there's any adventitious for adaptation there?" "For the aboriginal time." Meghan's anxiously accomplished smile faltered. Her jaw tightened. "Andy, my ancestor has awash lies to the tabloids for years. He chose publicity over family. He's had amaranthine affairs to handle things privately, and he didn't. That affiliate is closed." Her words were sharp, clipped, beneath an acknowledgement than a dismissal. The admirers murmured. Andy leaned advanced slightly, his announcement mild, but his articulation steady. "So, no achievability of him affair, Archie and Leet." Her eyes flashed. "I don't see why I should accolade betrayal. Would you let addition who about ashamed you aback into your home, Andy?" "Exactly. Let's not comedy naive." The abrupt chaw in her words acquired the allowance to still. The temperature seemed to drop. Andy maintained his calm demeanor, abnegation to acceleration to the hostility. I apprehend you, he said evenly, but some would alternate that ancestors' ties are, able-bodied, different, unique, account-preserving. They can alternate all they want, Meghan snapped, her accent acid again. They didn't alive my life. They didn't alive my reality. And frankly, I'm annoyed of bodies assuming they accept what it's like to be me. Andy took a sip of his drink. His beam abiding any time so slightly. He had spotted it. The able in her able armor. Meghan was already on edge, defensive, dismissive, and it was alone the beginning. He absentively to about-face apparatus aloof slightly. Let's allocution about aristocratic life, then. Aback you aboriginal abutting the family, you declared it as overwhelming. Some ability say you weren't prepared. Meghan's beam was low and humorless. Prepared. Andy? You can't adapt for walking into an academy that's centuries old and actually out of touch. It's ancient and candidly suffocating. I acclimatized. Bigger than anyone could have. Her articulation was steady, but the airs in her accent wasn't absent on anyone. Andy leaned advanced again, articulation still smooth. And yet, the British accessible didn't actually embrace you. Why do you anticipate that is? Meghan's aperture coiled into article akin a smirk. Because I was different. Because I challenged them. Because I wouldn't bow and scrape like they expected. And you perceive what? That's their problem, not mine. The admirers gasped softly. Alike. Andy, aggy his head, intrigued. He had interviewed amaranthine celebrities, but rarely had addition. Absolved to assimilate a set with this abundant, dismissive bravado. As the camera zoomed in on Meghan's altogether composed but added aciculate expression, Andy accomplished allotment one of his appearance had already gone off the rails, and there were still affluence of questions larboard to ask. The astriction was alone beginning. The bartering breach was short, but it did annihilation to air-condition the astriction on set. Meghan adapted her blazer with active, abrupt movements, her face annealed as the producers counted bottomward to cameras rolling. Again. Andy, on the added hand, sipped accidentally from his cocktail bottle as if annihilation abnormal had happened at all. Welcome aback to watch what happens live. Andy arose with that signature grin, admitting his eyes agitated a glint of steel. We're actuality with Meghan Markle, Amazon of Sussex, and we were aloof talking about aristocratic life. Let's booty this a footfall further. The camera cut to Meghan, who smiled tightly, her easily bound in her lap. Meghan, Andy began. Afore the palace, afore the Netflix deals, afore all of this, you were an actress. Suits fabricated you recognizable. And from there, things changed. Do you any time absence that world? The bulwark of auditions, the Hollywood hustle. Meghan's acknowledgement came quickly, about dismissively. I don't absence anything, Andy. I've outgrown it. Acting was a dispatch stone, not a destination. What I'm accomplishing now has added a pulse than arena some paralegal on TV any time. Could. Her accent was aciculate abundant to draw aggregate drag from the audience. Andy's brows aerial slightly. Interesting, because a lot of your admirers actually admired you on that show. Some ability say it was the foundation that fabricated. Aggregate away possible. Meghan gave a short, humorless laugh. With respect, Andy, my foundation is who I am, not what role I played. If bodies anticipate I'm accurate by a television show, that says added about them, then it does about me. The airs in her words was unmistakable. The admirers confused again. Andy didn't flinch. All right, he connected smoothly. Let's allocution about your alliance, then. The accessible allure is endless. Harry and Meghan. You two are all-around brands at this point, but with that comes rumors, strain, distance. Are you and Harry as solid as you say you are? Her announcement hardened. I'm not abiding what affectionate of catechism that is. Of course, we're solid. The rumors are noise. We don't accept to noise. Honestly, it's amusing that bodies anticipate they accept any acumen into our marriage. Andy leaned advanced slightly, articulation calm, but pointed. So, no accuracy whatsoever. To letters that the two of you accept been beneath pressure. That California life, media scrutiny, alike your own projects, none of it has created cracks. Meghan's smile returned, but this time it was icy. Andy, let me put it simply. We are stronger than ever, if bodies charged to ad-lib bogey tales to accomplish, themselves feel bigger about their lives, that's their business. But our absoluteness is love, commitment, and partnership. Full stop. The admirers murmured again. Not applause, not cheers, aloof a low hum of discomfort. Andy let the blackout amplitude of 4 he confused on. Let's go back to your time in the UK, he said carefully. There were, shall we say, alloyed animosity amid the British public. Some adored you, others were beneath welcoming. How do you see it now? Meghan's eyes narrowed aloof slightly. I see it as prejudice, apparent and simple. Bodies weren't accessible for addition like me declaiming their anachronist traditions. They capital addition Dokel. That's not me. And, yes, some of the abhorrence was racism. Let's not belie it. Her words were met with a calm that swept aloft the studio. Andy's accent remained steady. And yet, some critics altercate that it wasn't about race, but about attitude. That the way you agitated yourself, the decisions you fabricated created friction. What do you say to that? Meghan's acknowledgement was sharp, defensive. That's, actually, what bodies say about they don't appetite to accept bias. It's not about race. It's about her attitude. It's an acceptable excuse. The accuracy is, I absolved into a centuries-old system, and they didn't apperceive how to handle addition like me. So, they angry me into the problem. Andy's beam returned, aside but noticeable. But do you anticipate you buck any albatross at all? Any self-reflection on how your accessibility accept contributed? Meghan leaned forward, her articulation air-conditioned but decrepit with disdain. Albatross, for actuality myself? For not accidents low enough? For not animated at the appropriate moment? Please, if actuality accurate is a crime, afresh I'll appeal guilty. The admirers gasped cautiously again. Andy swirled his drink, the corners of his aperture twitching upward. He had dealt with divas, politicians, and absoluteness stars, but Meghan's heirs was alpha to beat alike Bravos accepted. Drama. Okay, Andy said lightly, admitting his eyes bound on hers. Last catechism for this block. You've announced a lot about abrogation aristocratic activity for privacy, and yet Netflix, Spotify, acknowledged memoirs, interviews with Oprah, and beyond. How do you acknowledge to those who alarm that contradictory? The chat landed like a strike. Meghan's easily anchored on the armrest. Her smile flickered, afresh hardened. Contradictory? No. Strategic. We ascendancy our story. We allotment what affairs aback it matters. That's not hypocrisy. That's survival. Her accent was sharp, cutting, the airs absurd to miss. Andy gave a apathetic nod, ambience his bottle down. Well, cardinal or not, it actually keeps bodies talking. The admirers confused again. The astriction, blubbery in the air. The Amazon had apparent her hand, defensive, smug, and afraid to accept alike the aboriginal flaw. And Andy Cohen, anytime the professional, wasn't done. The storm was still building. The Bravo set shimmered in its accepted, antic colors, but the atmosphere was annihilation, but light-hearted. Meghan, beyond her legs tightly, her easily bound in her lap, her announcement adventuresome Andy to try again. Andy, for his part, leaned accidentally adjoin his desk, addendum in hand, the faintest beam tugging at his lips. All right, Andy began smoothly. Let's allocution about one of the best acclaimed interviews of the accomplished decade. Your sit bottomward with Oprah. Millions watched. The apple was transfixed. But aback then, some of the claims you fabricated except been, let's say, challenged. Meghan's smile didn't budge, but her jawline tightened. I angle by aggregate, we said in that interview. Every distinct word. That was my truth, Andy. Your truth, Andy repeated, bouncing his glass. It's a byword you've acclimated a lot. But here's the affair about truth, Meghan. It's usually aloof truth. Facts, not perspectives. Her eyes narrowed. Are you analytic, my honesty? Andy captivated her gaze. I'm analytic contradictions. For example, you told Oprah you and Harry were affiliated 3 canicule for the official bells in a clandestine ceremony. But the Archbishop of Canterbury, himself, afterwards antiseptic, that wasn't a acknowledged marriage, aloof and barter of vows. Do you see how that looks? Misleading. A calm fell over the audience. Meghan leaned forward, her articulation sharp. What Harry and I aggregate abreast was sacred. Whether the Abbey of England calls it acknowledged or not is irrelevant. What mattered was our commitment. Andy nodded, but his smile agitated an adumbration of steel. But you didn't say that to Oprah. You said, quote, we were affiliated afore, the wedding. Millions of bodies believed you. Aback the arch of the Abbey corrects you publicly. That's not semantics. That's a problem. Meghan's adenoids flared. You're a G-it. You complete aloof like the British press, atrocious to aces afar my words instead of absorption on the bigger account of what I endured. Andy aloft a brow, but his accent remained calm. Well, let's stick with your words then. In that aforementioned interview, you claimed you had your authorization and keys taken away, that you were trapped, central the palace. Yet, anal appearance you abounding assorted accessible events, Catholic abroad, alike vacationed. How does that add up? The flat admirers let out a ripple of murmurs. Meghan confused in her seat, her accord arise aloof slightly. Do you accept what it's like to alive in a gilded cage? Andy, aloof. Because I was accustomed to arise inaccessible doesn't beggarly, I was free. Every move was monitored, every footfall controlled. You wouldn't understand. Andy gave a baby laugh, admitting it was abandoned of humor. Maybe not. But what I do accept is inconsistency. You've corrected yourself as both actually blank and actually in ascendancy depending on which account you're giving, and body's apprehension that. Meghan's eyes flashed with irritation. Body's apprehension what they appetite to notice. I accept annihilation to apologize for. I told my adventure, and I will abide to do so on my terms. If the accessible can't but nuance, that's their problem. Not mine. Her dismissive accent beatific a ripple of anxiety through the audience. Andy leaned forward, his articulation bottomward into article quieter but sharper. So, aback critics say you've monetized victimhood, the Netflix deal, the Spotify deal, Harry's memoir. Are they additionally aloof? Declining to but nuance? The temperature in this allowance plummeted. Meghan's aperture apprenticed into a tenuate line. That allegation is beneath you, Andy. We've congenital platforms to amplify choir that accept been silenced, to highlight, causes that matter. That's not monetizing, that's service. Andy swirled his drink, eyes anchored on her. Account that aloof happens to appear with million-dollar checks, book sales, and bright PR deals. Actually, a coincidence. Meghan's accord absurd further. She leaned forward, her articulation decrepit with contempt. Do you apish every bedfellow who tries to accomplish a difference? Or is it aloof me? Andy didn't blink. I don't apish anyone. I authority bodies accountable, especially aback they authority themselves up as symbols of actuality while arena by celebrity rules. The admirers deserves the truth, Meghan. Not aloof, your truth. The admirers audibly gasped. Meghan sat aback in her chair, her face flushed, her easily arresting the armrests. For the aboriginal time all evening, the affectation of able calm seemed to slip. "Maybe," Andy added coolly, "it's not the British tabloids or the aristocratic ancestors or alike Hollywood that's the problem. Maybe, aloof, maybe, it's you." Meghan's eyes widened, her face pale, a fresh bound ablaze with rage. She opened her aperture to respond, but for a moment no words came. The Amazon of Sussex, usually so quick, so controlled, was visibly rattled. Andy took an apathetic sip from his cocktail. Absolution, the blackout stretch. Absolution, the camera's alcohol, and every beam of affect on Meghan's face. The admirers sat frozen, not adventuresome to move. Alive, they were witnessing article extraordinary. This wasn't an account anymore. It was a reckoning, and the final act was still to come. Aback the cameras came aback from commercial. Meghan sat adamant in her chair. Her face betrayed the ache of captivation herself together. Her blazer altogether straightened, but her eyes burning. Andy confused his notes, leaned back in his chair, and smiled. Not with warmth, but with the aplomb of a man who knew he had. His bedfellow cornered. "So, Meghan," Andy began, his articulation calm, about conversational. "We've talked about your marriage, the Oprah interview, your acting career. Let's allocution about perception. A lot of bodies out there feel you've austere bridges with about everyone. Your father, your sister, the Alcazar staff, alike longtime friends. Why do you anticipate that keeps happening?" Meghan's arch breeze adjoined him, her accent sharp. "Because bodies advertise lies, Andy. They abandon assurance for a banderole or a payday. It's not me, it's them. Every distinct time." Andy nodded slowly, bouncing the ice in his glass. "So, you're adage the accepted denominator in all of these burst relationships, isn't you?" The admirers let out a collective, "Ooh!" Meghan's eyes narrowed, her aperture tightening. "I will not sit actuality and be psychoanalyzed by addition who profits off gossip. I've spent my activity aggravating to acceleration aloft baneful bodies, in baneful institutions." Andy leaned advanced now, his articulation steady but with a razor edge. Baneful people, baneful institutions, or anyone who doesn't angle to your narrative. Her face flushed. "That's calumniating and bluntly sexist." Andy set his bottle bottomward with advised calm. "No, Meghan, this isn't sexism. This is accountability. And if you're attractive for addition to accusation for every burst relationship, every bucking in your story, maybe it's time to attending in the mirror." The flat was asleep silent. Meghan's easily absorbed the accoutrements of her chair, her Duke white. Her articulation trembled, but with acerbity rather than fear. "You don't apperceive me, Andy. You don't apperceive what I've been through." Andy's beam faded, replaced by an announcement of authentic resolve. "I don't charge to apperceive you personally, Meghan. I aloof except to attending at the pattern. You were a moderately acknowledged actress. You affiliated into the best acclaimed ancestors in the world. And from that moment on, you angry every affliction into a headline, every claimed altercation into content. You congenital a cast not on who you are, but on who you married." The draft landed. Meghan inhaled sharply, her eyes wide. "That is actually outrageous," she whispered. Andy apprenticed on, his articulation now booming aloft the studio. "You alarm. Yourself a duchess, but you accept no role in the monarchy. You affirmation independence, but you alive off the privileges that appellation gave you. You say you appetite privacy, but you've done added interviews, podcasts, and documentaries than anyone away in that family. Tell me, Meghan, what actually... Are you afterwards Harry's aftermost name?" Gasps erupted from the audience. Meghan's face channeled for the aboriginal time, the burnish of ascendancy evaporating. Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned forward, her articulation breaking. How cartel you? Afterwards aggregate I've endured. How cartel you abate me to aloof? Andy cut her off, his accent slicing through her words. How cartel you abate anybody else, Kate? William the Queen, to villains in your adventure so you can comedy the abiding. Victim. You weren't pushed out, Meghan. You absolved out and you've been cashing in any time since. The camera zoomed in as Meghan's tears began to fall, her face angled with abasement and rage. The blackout in the flat was suffocating. You're jealous, Andy continued, his articulation now lower, added, measured, but lethal. Jalouse of William, and Kate, anxious of the account they accept earned, the adulation they inspire, the adroitness they appearance beneath the aforementioned spotlight you claimed about destroyed you. The aberration is they chose duty. You chose drama. Meghan befuddled her arch-berserk at her articulation arise as she approved to speak. That's not true. That's not fair. Andy didn't flinch. Fair. Activity in the aristocratic ancestors isn't about fair. It's about responsibility, and you angry castigation into a brand. A cast congenital on complaints, contradictions, and cash. The tears were abounding advisedly now. Meghan pulled out her microphone, averseness to abstract it as her duke shook. The admirers sat in abashed silence, their eyes darting amid host and bedfellow as history abundant in advance of them. This is over, Meghan said finally, her articulation affrayed with acerbity and humiliation. I will not sit actuality and be attacked like this. Andy leaned back in his chair, the account of calm. No, Meghan, you're not actuality attacked. You're actuality exposed. There's a difference. She rose abruptly, casting the microphone assimilate the armchair with a aciculate crack. Her heels clicked to join the flat attic as she strode to join the exit, her amateur rigid. The camera followed her until she abolished abaft the curtain. Andy, angry, boring aback to the admirers and the cameras, his announcement was cool, unshaken. Well, he said, articulation decrepit with finality. High assumption that's one way to end an interview. The flat erupted, bisected in applause, bisected in abashed murmurs. The admirers had aloof witnessed what would go bottomward as one of the best atomic interviews in backward night history. Andy straightened his notes, glanced at his cocktail, and looked beeline into the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Meghan Markle. Will be appropriate aback afterwards, this. The lights dimmed, the affair music swelled, and the articulation ended, but the fallout was alone aloof beginning. But here's the question. Did Andy go too far, or did Meghan assuredly face the accountability she's been avoiding? Let me apperceive what you anticipate in the comments below. Don't balloon to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification alarm so you never absence added affecting showdowns like this.